Hello everyone, I hope you all are doing well. Today's video is a bit of an unusual situation, as it is a response to a response from none other than Darby Callahan. He also happens to be my former roommate from college. For those unfamiliar with Mr. Callahan, he hosts the Callahan Corner Podcast, a conservative Catholic podcast dedicated to a mix of Catholic theology and pro-life political coverage. Before my channel became a bit more standardized in its approach, I actually went on the show to discuss the 2020 election and the role abortion might play leading up to it. On December 3rd, 2024, Mr. Callahan released a video titled Response to Connor Kelly of Progressive American and Foreign Relations, unquote. In it, Mr. Callahan takes issue with my interview with the University of Illinois Springfield's Dr. Isabel Skinner, in which she and I discussed the role of sexism in elections. More specifically, we discussed how it might impact the 2024 election. Rather than attempt to summarize and potentially misrepresent Mr. Callahan's argument, I will let him speak for himself.
Hello everyone, this is Callahan Corner. I am Darby Callahan, and this is my latest video. Connor Kelly from Progressive American.
Alright, this is a bit of a nitpick, but I want to point out that Mr. Callahan got the name of my show wrong. It's not Progressive American, it's The Progressive American. It's supposed to sound like a newspaper like the New York Times or the Washington Post, the inspiration being that I was known for reading physical newspapers at my alma mater. It's not really a big point, but it is a little annoying when somebody gets the name wrong. Nonetheless, I'll let him continue with his point.
Recently hosted a discussion with Dr. Isabel Skinner from the University of Illinois Springfield regarding the 2024 United States presidential election. While I agree sexism, misogyny, and racism do occur in this country and should be discussed, however, I have serious concerns about perpetuating those issues as the reason President Donald J. Trump won a second term after Joe Biden won 4 years ago. To insinuate that Joe Biden or any other male candidate could have beaten Donald J. Trump in 2024 is a serious understatement. When you look at the issues, Vice President Kamala Harris was a bad candidate by many standards. If you look at her record as vice president and even previous to that, there are various reports that she allowed people we have had a record to be released from prison prior to their sentence. She also chose vice president candidate who allowed the city of Minneapolis to burn after the wake of George Floyd. While the case of George Floyd is very disturbing and has really opened the eyes of the current generation to the continuance of racism in this country, we must stop blaming all cops and all actions of a few bad cops. And prior that Margaret Sanger founded the organization Planned Parenthood, who was created with a majority of abortions in the United States. The Hosea Project is now raising concern about the abortion industry complex in America. The Hosea Project is the initiative that was started by co-founders of NARAL, who used to be an abortionist, but became pro-life before he died. He exposed the initiatives of the pro-abortion movement, including dividing the Catholic Church from within. This is why even though the abortion has been definitively named a moral wrong by the Catholic Church, there is still an organization called Catholics for Choice, which is a pro-abortion organization that claims to be Catholic, yet they do not share the voices of the Catholic Church that they claim to be part of. So it is no wonder that the Catholic voters were more likely to choose Donald J. Trump. While I do not believe Donald Trump is the most pro-life candidate as he was in 2016 or 2020, I do believe that he's morally better than Kamala Harris, who ran on the issue of reproductive rights, which is just another way of saying pro-abortion. She wants to allow abortion all the way up to birth. Even if she did not, she would have expressed interest in some sort of national standard, especially after Dobbs, which overturned Roe. For example, she could have supported no abortions after 25 weeks, a point in the pregnancy that goes well beyond the pro-life movement is pushing. Despite the current Democratic Party will tell you, a majority of Americans would put limits on when abortions can be had. For example, when I was helping poll people at the local county fair, I found a majority of pro-choice people would limit abortions after a certain point.
So right off the bat, his video has a glaring error. Mr. Callahan claims I blamed Vice President Harris's defeat on sexism and that I reinforced the narrative that male candidates automatically win. There's a pretty big problem with that claim, namely the fact that the interview took place on October 24th, 2024, and was released the following day. Donald Trump didn't win until November 5th, 12 days later. I didn't do any video discussions on the election until November 21st on the Left Coast Live podcast, and I didn't repost that recording until November 27th of that same year. So unless Mr. Callahan believes I have a time machine, I couldn't exactly say if Harris would have won or lost, much less determine why that happened. I even said she was doing well leading up to the election. On the day of the election, I posted to Instagram with a rough prediction of how the electoral vote will go. In that post, I wrote, quote, "This is my rough prediction. I'm cautiously optimistic, but it is too close to call." If I truly believed that Harris would lose because of sexism, why did I post that she had a decent chance of winning from the beginning? Why did I phone bank for her and wear a Harris Walls pin during that very interview with Dr. Skinner? If my political evaluation of Harris was so limited to just sexism as the deciding factor, I wouldn't have made multiple posts on my show talking about how well she did in the debate and leading up to the election. If anything, I would argue that I have looked at Harris's campaign and have been critical of some of her strategies. I mentioned that sexism played a role, but it is not the deciding factor in my analysis.
What went wrong from a strategic planning perspective in terms of targeting, messaging, and political marketing? But and I did a video about that. But or I'm going to do a video about the 3 contextual reasons and 3 reasonable reasons she didn't win. But what were your thoughts? I mean, 7 million votes, right? That's a pretty big dip. Biden got 7 million more votes than she did this time.
Yeah, so I there's a couple things. So a bit of context for what I've been doing. I was uploading pretty frequently, and then I stopped for a bit. Did occasional interviews here and there. But I was working on the Progressive Turnout Project, working as one of the fellows working for Sean Casten to make sure he wasn't going to get hit by Nikki Conforti. And we were lucky enough to, the incumbency advantage in that case prevailed by 6.8 points. For those who know Illinois politics, that seat used to belong to Peter Roskam, a Republican, about 4 races ago. So while it is kind of bluish purple, I wasn't about to take anything for granted, and I wanted to make sure I could put as much of my experience as possible to basically ensure that seat held up. And we were thankfully able to secure that, no problem. But as to the issue with Kamala Harris, I think a lot of people, there's so much here because on the one hand, we have to consider the environment in which Kamala Harris was running. And not just on the national level, but on the global level, across the board.
Yeah.
Incumbents lost. Incumbent parties lost. Incumbent politicians lost. And there was just a massive movement towards the right on the global stage. Now, I would say that I want to be very clear. That does not mean the Republicans have a mandate here. I have it right here in the terms of the popular vote on the national level. Trump won the popular vote by 1.6%. This is according to Reuters. Harris had 48.3% of the popular vote, Trump 49.9% when the total count was completed.
Yeah.
In the simplest of terms, Trump did not win a majority of the vote. He won a plurality. Now, he still wins.
That's right.
He still wins, and he still got more votes than Kamala Harris, and that still is unacceptable for a Democratic candidate that really should have been able to cream this convict. Yeah. The problem I think we've had is not only do we have a complete reversal of the incumbency advantage, which turns political science on its head in many cases, but we also just had an attempt to appeal to Republican aesthetics, which did not help an already difficult situation. One of the things I did before Kamala Harris's defeat was I did an interview with Dr. Isabel Skinner of the University of Illinois Springfield, and we were discussing sexism in elections. And one of the things that was brought up in passing was whenever a woman politician tries to go outside the perceived stereotype of the woman politician, they sometimes get penalized, especially if they try to make themselves appear more masculine. And I think part of the problem in that case was we still have not broken through the sexist thinking that hurts us. And that doesn't mean we shouldn't run women for the presidency. We should.
Of course, yeah.
But we also have to realize when we have this shift to the right on issues of gender and sex, there has to be a way that we have to talk about the candidates that doesn't allow bigoted people like Donald Trump and his supporters in some cases to basically ramrod the candidate into being the laughing Kamala, the crazy lady. That's how he billed her. And I think in that case, we did not have a proper defense thematically to basically say, no, this guy just does not care about policy. He has no policy. He will not improve your life. He will not make the price of groceries go down. His tariffs will make it worse. So I think thematically there was that. The other thing is, I think what was really frustrating it to me, and I was hoping that with Biden dropping out, Kamala Harris could distinguish herself from Biden, and she did fail to do that. And so I think she was dealt with an incumbency penalty. But I would also point out, like, she was caught in a very bad position. I think if Kamala Harris was running months earlier, if she was given more time to kind of be respectful towards the administration she was serving in, and also distinguishing herself as a candidate in her own right, I think she would have done a lot better. And just one other thing I want to say, there was a lot of people, particularly online, that were just heavy right-wingers. I mean, we've seen data set after data set showing that Republicans and conservative media, especially appealing to young men, has been devastating to progressive media and its ability to communicate. And unfortunately, what we've seen in, at least on the progressive Twitch politics, YouTube politics, even the newsletter kind of thing, is we don't really have a guy. We don't have a main person or set of people who are explicitly saying, go out and vote. Vote Democrat over and over and over again. Republicans, they're on top of that message every single election. If Mr. Callahan believes that I said sexism is the only reason she lost, or that I in any way argued that women candidates can't win, then he needs to provide evidence to support that. He won't find any because I never said that. Part of the reason the interview occurred was because Dr. Skinner was one of 2 professors who oversaw my comprehensive exam on women's recruitment for public office and descriptive representation, which details many of the factors that I discussed in that interview. My comprehensive exam, for which I won an award, was titled Women's Recruitment and the Importance of Women in the Electoral Sphere, and was explicitly dedicated to rejecting men's dominance in electoral politics. In fact, in my research, I found since as early as 1990, women win at similar rates as men when they choose to run for public office. The problem is increasing political ambition among women and young girls early on by changing how we talk about women's role in society. I said that in the interview, and so did Dr. Skinner. One of the things that keeps coming up is there is this attempt to invalidate her identity as inauthentic. And I do think one of the things that keeps coming up, not just with Vice President Harris, but also with women candidates in general, is there seems to be this authenticity gap that is applied towards women that is not applied to men, especially as it relates to how brazen their rhetoric is, like for men, versus how women are allowed to speak as candidates. And I was wondering if you could go into that a little bit.
Sure. I mean, just in general, women can't win in terms of stereotypes. I mean, think about, this is kind of true in the workplace, in politics, in personal life. If you're too masculine, that's a bad thing. If you're too feminine, that's a bad thing. If you're too loud, that's a bad thing. If you're too quiet, it's a bad. So it's kind of, there's definitely this way in which the stereotypes about women can really just put you in such a box. And this is also really true for Black women, especially, who have to walk this tightrope between being seen as effective communicators, but avoiding the angry Black woman stereotype. And of course, former President Trump did try to invalidate Kamala Harris's Blackness by arguing that she only recently became Black. And so you might say, but she's always identified as biracial, Black and Indian. She was an AKA at Howard University, like she is Black. But again, as Tolliver points out, the problem is having to justify the identity. And then it also leads into stereotypes too about like what counts. How do you be Black correctly? How do you be Indian correctly? How to be a woman correctly? It's just so tough to do. And so during a campaign, people are really put on the spotlight. I remember vividly that Hillary Clinton sort of famous or maybe infamously said, they expect me to be in the kitchen like baking cookies, and that's just not me. And so for her, she was trying to distance herself from the stereotype of like what women do. Like, I love baking. There's all different kinds of ways to be a woman, right? But for her, she was really frustrated, I think, with the way that she was pigeonholed And clearly there was decades-long sort of formation of who Hillary Clinton was in the public eye. But Kamala Harris is a little bit more unknown, even though she's the first woman to fulfill this role as vice president.
Simply because Mr. Callahan misunderstands the content of the interview doesn't mean that said content is flawed or wrong. Nowhere in his video does Mr. Callahan go into any of my other content or discussions surrounding the election, including my guest appearance on Left Coast Live or in any of the clips widely available on my social media accounts. There is an hour and a half of content that I uploaded almost a week ago discussing many of the reasons Harris lost, none of which relate to her vice presidential pick or supposed radical abortion politics. As to the issue of abortion, the only thing I will say is that if the issue of abortion were such a hindrance to Vice President Harris's campaign, we wouldn't have seen pro-choice ballot initiatives overwhelmingly win in that same election. Of the 10 states that had ballot initiatives on abortion, 6 out of 10 unabashedly won. Even states like Missouri, which Trump won with 58.5% of the vote, voted for Amendment 3, which expanded the right to an abortion. Arizona, which Trump narrowly won by 3.1%, voted for Amendment 139, which also expanded access to abortion, and they did so by 61.6%. The same pattern occurred in Nevada, which had 64.4% of its voters support enshrining abortion in the state constitution. If anything, abortion would have been a boon to Harris's campaign, not a weakness. The only complication of the 10 states in question is Nebraska, which passed dueling initiatives seemingly contradicting each other. There were many reasons why Harris lost to Trump. She came into the race fairly late, with only 100 or so days to the election. She dealt with a reversal of the incumbency advantage on the global stage and frustration with inflation. Yes, sexism and racism were contributing factors. I would never deny that. But to suggest that I believe or said that they were the main reason she lost is absurd. Every campaign is multifaceted and multi-causal. I have made that point repeatedly, and I hope I will get the chance to do so again. I look forward to debating with Mr. Callahan, and maybe our future debate will allow some clarity on the issue.